Hello viewers, welcome to yet another episode of Sales Gambit. I'm your host, Ashish, CEO of Convin, a conversation intelligence platform for the sales teams. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Kim Orleski, CEO of KO Advantage Group and CEO and co-founder of Sales Unicorn. Kim is a sales futurist and also one of the top LinkedIn sales influencers. And today's episode is all about how to use videos to ace virtual selling in 2022. Or you can still say how to sort of do best kind of video selling. Kim, we are so happy to have you with us today. Welcome to Sales Gambit.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Kim, so we know a little bit about your selling journey, right? But it would be great if you can tell us about how you got into sales and more specifically, how did the whole virtual selling begin for you?
Yeah, so I think like most salespeople, I never intended on being a salesperson. It just kind of fell onto my lap. So when I had graduated post-secondary, I ended up taking my first sales role with Xerox. And that was really around understanding sales process, how to work with things. When I ended up leaving there, I worked for American Express, and that was really my first forte into virtual selling without it actually having that formal name. I was in a home office. A lot of my clients were across the country, across North America, even a couple in South America. And so it never made sense for us to get on a flight and have a lot of these meetings. We had to get very good at everything from emails, phone calls. And at the time, technology like Skype was just starting to take off. And so we had to learn how to use that appropriately. Fast forward a few more years, I ended up leaving all corporate sales, ended up creating my own sales training company, because what I ended up seeing was that the idea of virtual selling, the idea of being able to connect with clients for high value transactions, regardless of where you were geographically, was something that could be taken over by a lot more companies, and they weren't finding themselves established with that. So we started KO Sales U, which is really around an academy on how to sell high value transactions a lot faster, a lot easier through a lot of these virtual selling methods. And we've been doing that since 2017 and continuing to expand that, because more and more companies are starting to embrace this. And as we go further into 2022 and beyond, more companies are seeing this as a really much more profitable way of selling, as a part of their sales process, whether they want to fully embrace that or have that as a hybrid model going forward.
So I have a very quick question, Kim, and I heard you till the point where you said that people would have to have, a lot of people have actually shifted to hybrid sales model, right? So I have a very question following that up. Do you still believe that there can exist a company in coming times which don't shift on at least a hybrid sales model of remote plus field?
I think it's going to be harder and harder for sales teams to find success if they require every single client meeting to be in person. And specifically, I think about this from the buyer's perspective. Buyers are no longer interested in having an hour of their time taken up in an initial meeting unless they already saw some type of value or they believe that they're going to move forward. So when we look at hybrid models, it will be more the case that sales teams are going to be finding themselves successful if, number one, they're only asking for an initial meeting of 15, 20 minutes, which makes more sense to do that through virtual meetings, through video conferencing and communication channels, whereas perhaps closer to like, the third, fourth, and subsequent meetings may make more sense to have in an in-person environment, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So I think going forward, more teams are going to have to embrace at least the initial interactions, the lead generation, the lead qualification stages as a virtual method. And then if it makes sense for them to then add on in-person communications for later on meetings, but it doesn't have to be that way. And that's where they're going to find themselves most successful.
Do you think this would hold true for the companies like enterprise company? Let's say I'm selling to an enterprise company. Will it still hold true that way?
I think it's even going to be more so true for enterprise level companies, especially from, yet again, that buyer's perspective. When you get to some of these enterprise level organizations, you have much more formal roles in the buying process. You have your procurement teams, you have your decision makers, your influencers, and a lot of different levels of influence and information gathering at these stages. And so for an information gatherer role, they're going to be much more interested in just tell me what I need. I'll answer a few questions for me, and then let's see how this compares to the other solutions or other potential products that I'm looking at. And so, to force somebody to have to sit down with you for a 30-minute, 45, an hour long meeting, and let's be honest, in-person meetings are rarely going to be less than 30 minutes. We're not going to commute for a longer period of time than the actual meeting itself. It's going to be much more critical for enterprise level companies to understand how to use virtual effectively inside their entire sales process.
Makes sense. And though, let's say everyone knows about what virtual selling is, but let's say that there's a sales leader transitioning from this whole idea of field sales to virtual sales, right? And trying to
Yes.
embrace it for the first time. How do you suggest they start thinking about it? In terms of framework and in terms of long-term understanding about it?
I think when it comes to this concept of virtual selling, the first thing that any sales leader has to ask themselves is, what do I expect my sales process and my sales team to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? Research companies like Gartner have actually said that 80% of B2B transactions are actually going to have some level of remote or self-serve for buyers at that point in time. And if the trends continue, which they always do, it's really hard for somebody to go from 100% video communication, not meeting people, to 100% back to always being in person. That's very unlikely that it's going to happen. And so understanding where, number one, do we believe this? Do we see that that's going to happen? And then once sales leaders believe that that is, then the question becomes, where in our sales process does it make the most amount of sense for us to at least start with that transaction? And in most cases, this actually happens closer to the lead generation and the qualification purposes of the sales objectives. So getting themselves to a place where, number one, how are we using methods such as social selling? How are we using LinkedIn to connect with our buyers? How are we using that as a research tool to get to know them, to reach out to them, to have them book meetings? How are we integrating that inside of our CRM so that we are maintaining the contact information on how are we communicating with them? Companies such as Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce, and even HubSpot to a certain extent have already integrated Sales Navigator information inside their CRM. So they already see this as a tool. The other thing that sales leaders need to ask themselves is, how do we have a meeting with our clients in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and be able to get the information that we need in order to decide this is a go or no-go conversation? It's very critical, especially in that introductory phase, to understand where the client is coming from, find out, is this someone that we can service? Are they appropriate for our business? To then determine whether it's worth the additional investment to continue to meet with them subsequently. Too many companies waste their time by allowing a first meeting to really be about, let me explain to you who I am as a client, who I am as a company, the products that we do. Are you interested, customer? And the customer will typically not be really sure, but for the interest of them to continue to get information, they'll say, well, yes, I am. It doesn't mean that they believe that that's a perfect fit for their business or that you're going to be able to service them, but they do want more information. And so they'll continue on. Companies need to turn that around and ask themselves, what are the things that we look for in a client? What are some of the things that we see who is successful with our service, who's successful with our products? And what information would we need to hear from them through the questions that we ask? And how do we get that information within 15 or 20 minutes? That is really where companies need to start with in virtual selling, getting really clear at a 15-minute conversation, a 20-minute first meeting entirely for virtual, and then deciding how far down the virtual path do they want to take. There's almost zero companies that will refuse, from a buyer's perspective, zero companies who will refuse to meet with a prospective company interaction, a selling organization that will deny a 20-minute virtual meeting, but will accept a 1-hour first level in-person meeting. Get really good at the virtual, and it will translate to in-person. Just because you may have been good at in-person meetings doesn't mean you're going to translate into effective, concise virtual meetings.
Makes sense. And I totally agree with you. What you're saying is that in case, even if it becomes hybrid, they really have to make sure that they are first figuring out the basics of the whole deal or the sales opportunity on the virtual meetings, and then probably, if needed down the sales cycle, figure out in-person meeting if needed only, right?
Absolutely.
And you think that
Absolutely.
the organizations will even accept it going further, even the high level organizations, the enterprise clients as well.
We're seeing so much research now that, I mean, LinkedIn did a state of sales future last year, and it said that I believe it was 15% of buyers at that time. So back in 2021, I think maybe the research had been done late 2020, but it was like 15% of buyers were willing to spend upwards of $1 million without ever meeting a salesperson in person. They were happy to do everything either through remote or through self-serve methods. And the idea behind this is that more and more buyers just want the information, because there's constant trends happening. We have now a space where there are people born after the year 2000 who are now entering the workforce. We have in 5 years, 27% of the workforce will be born after the year 2000. So, I mean, by 2026, right, more than 1 in 4 people, more than that, will be born from a place where they were, completely brought into social media, into video, into YouTube. This is how they gather their information. And if we're not speaking to people in how they like to communicate, at what point will your company be ready to address that? You are ultimately saying, listen, we're going to continue to work with the 3 out of 4 people who are not at that age, and we're going to continue to develop our sales process in a demographic that is going to continue to decline. I don't know of any successful company who has put all of their eggs in a communication method that is ultimately dying. And if that is how your future process, your vision is setting yourself up for success, I wish you the best of luck in the future. Like this is a critical mass place. And if your company hasn't seen this as critical mass yet, you need to ask yourself, at what point will we decide we are ready to invest in the growing demographic, not the dying demographic?
Makes a lot of sense, Kim. A very related question here. You said that, because we know that, people will have to invest some sort of time, increasingly virtual, for the first few steps of the deal cycle, right? And let's say discovery calls are one of those calls, where it makes a lot of sense to have a virtual connection with the prospect, right? Generally, a lot of discovery calls happen on video. And so we'll agree that video is a very important part of virtual selling. A very
Absolutely.
important problem on the video part is actually to have undivided attention from your prospects, making sure that you have kept them engaged and kept the conversation meaningful on that, on that video call. How do you do that? How do you make sure that this is something that you're not missing when you have shifted to virtual sales and the video method of it?
So, I mean, this is a hard thing to do, because I mean, anytime you put out any type of content, so whether we're talking about asynchronous or synchronous, right? So asynchronous really is around I'm going to send you a video, you're going to watch it on your own time. Whereas synchronous is very similar to what we're doing right now. You and I are having a direct conversation in real time. You can't gather the information until you ask me that. We are constantly running into the attention factor of people, and whether we're talking about from a salesperson perspective, or you're a marketer and you're talking about how do I make my video go viral, there is no one answer. But what we have seen is the shorter the message, the more likely someone is to be able to go through the entire thing. This is why, number one, from a synchronous meeting perspective or synchronous video communication method, I very much promote and encourage companies to get to that 20-minute meeting. In 20 minutes, we are in and we are out. And anything that goes on beyond that, you start to lose the attention span of somebody. It means that we have to be very tailored and specific on, this is the information we need to find out, this is the information we need to gather, and then we move on and have yet another meeting. You may have to have more meetings, but overall, from a sales perspective, you probably will be in active sales cycle a lot less, because many 20-minute meetings will very rarely equal to a few handful of long 1 hour long meetings. On the asynchronous side, whether we're talking about lead generation, we're talking about follow-up, we're talking about, here's some information I want you to know about our product, about our company, about who we like to work with. This means, yet again, really short messaging. But instead of trying to think that you're going to be able to send out a 20-minute video, which will never be watched by anyone unless you have the budget of a company like Netflix, where you're actually going to have maybe some explosions and really fun engagement, it's very unlikely. And so in your asynchronous videos, your best bet is actually to have videos that are 2 minutes or less, ideally even less than 90 seconds. One of the things I said from A Future of Sales is that's why TikTok has really taken off. They have mastered and allowed creators to get really good at videos that are less than 2 minutes long. Get to a place where your video is 2 minutes long. If you insist on having a long form content video, so whereas long form content in blog posts is usually anything over 800 words, 1200, 1500 words, a long form video is going to be beyond 7 minutes. And unless somebody has already invested into paying for a 7-minute video, they're less likely to watch a 7-minute video for free. If they do, that can actually be a really good indicator that you're more likely to get that deal. So you can use that as a metric for yourself to say anyone who watches the entire 7-minute video is going to be a hot lead, versus anyone who watches less than a half of it is going to be a cold lead. And anybody who falls in between, we're going to consider that to be a warm lead, and we have to continue to nurture them. So you can watch the attention span of people inside these videos if you choose to use that specifically. Otherwise, in order to get really good, just master videos that are less than 2 minutes long.
Very interesting. So what you're saying is that in both cases of synchronous and asynchronous communication, in both places, length of the meeting is going to be the key. Like, how do you keep it short and crisp? And in general, if you're sending them the let's say a blog post to read or something like that, you should be looking at probably a very crisp and a shorter message to go for, right?
Way shorter. And people like less is going to be so much more. And for a lot of sales teams, they're going to challenge themselves to get to this place. I mean, this is the whole reason why our company ultimately exists, because it's everything from how do you create a video in less than 2 minutes that actually is watched from and taken action upon by a lead? How do you create an email in less than 100 words that actually gets the client to agree to meet with you? How do you have a meeting in less than 20 minutes? And so a lot of this is very time sensitive metrics that we have to get to. But if your sales team is not doing it, you are at risk not of losing the deal to a prospect, but at risk of having your prospect never continue down the sales journey with you. And that is what most companies are seeing. It's not that they're losing deals to competitors, but that they're just not winning the deals because the prospect says to themselves, this is taking too much of my time. I will get there when I have more time to commit. And that is what the biggest area that people are losing in their sales. So instead of trying to get your clients to get to a place where they will have more time to commit, because they never will, get your message to be much shorter. And it's really hard for someone to say, I couldn't find 2 minutes. Right. I wasn't able to read your 100-word email. It's very much difficult, but it takes a lot more time and a lot more discipline from a salesperson perspective to get to those concise messages that allow the person to take action.
I would have loved to got into the details of how to, make sure that the messages are very crisp, but in interest of the time, I'll have to go towards the video again. So very specific questions came on the video side that you have pointed out, and I really want to know your, understanding there. Let's assume that you're on a video call with one of the prospect, right? And this video call is beyond the discovery stage that you're doing. What generally happened in face-to-face connections is that you were very, the whole connection started to kick off very easily, right? It's easy to handle people face to face, but while you're on the video, it's very difficult to have that physical connection, right? Which all the parties were accustomed to. How do you suggest overcoming this obstacle in the video calls?
Yeah. So like a lot of mimics that we used to do, even in person, right? One of the things that they used to teach us as salespeople was to mimic the brain to believe that we were creating connection and rapport very quickly. And in person, this was everything from when the client leans in, you lean in. When they lean back, right? Look at the same things that they're looking at. Sit at the same side of the table so that you're looking forward together, not in an adversarial face-to-face position. In video, we can do the same thing. This means, number one, just from a meeting etiquette perspective, having really good lighting, having, proper audio, using an external headset. From a bare minimum, that should be a required piece of technology that you would now supply every one of your salespeople. Is it going to be a remote AirPods or earbuds? Is it going to be a wired headset? But it has to be an external audio. People will forgive bad video, but they won't forgive bad audio. And then from that connection piece, make sure you know where you're providing eye contact. Are you looking at the camera from time to time? Looking at the camera allows the brain to feel like they're being mimicked into giving eye contact, which shows I'm paying attention to you. If your person is using dual monitors and they're looking away, that gives us the impression that this person isn't very interested or they're not connecting with us in that perspective.
Yeah.
So doing that. And then yet again, having those short meetings, it's easy to maintain the entire attention span of somebody when they know that there's a time limitation to the amount that they have to devote. When meetings continue to go on beyond more than 20 minutes, you're going to very quickly lose the attention span of someone. Ask a lot of questions, listen for answers. If you're asking questions and you're getting the client to spend more time speaking, they have to be engaged. So, do a quick debrief of your meeting and ask yourself, who did the majority of the talking? And if it was anything more than 50%, where 50% the client was talking, or less than that, where they were spending 30%, 40%, they're definitely not engaged. And the likeliness of you getting a subsequent meeting dramatically goes down. And then finally, always ensure that you're booking your next meeting while you're in that meeting. That is a non-negotiable right then and there, and say, are you available Tuesday at 9:00 for us to continue this conversation? Shorter meetings, more of them, continuing to build momentum, pay attention to your camera.
Makes sense. And these are some of the great advices, Kim. And a question related to this would be, and that generally happens with all of us, is that nowadays, because everyone has moved remote, working from home is something which is inevitable, right? I'm not sure how often you can go in and find a place to work outside your home, but let's say a lot of people have turned their home into offices. What, in your opinion, should be some of the best practices that sellers should consider to avoid distractions and concentrate while they're working from home?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily avoid distractions and concentrate, but allow yourself the ability to have more breaks, or, allow yourself to have the ability to walk away from your desk from time to time. For a lot of people, they get Zoom fatigue, or it becomes a lot to stare in front of a camera. So
Mhm.
instead of feeling like you need to have your entire, you have to sit for 4 hours straight while you're having meeting after meeting, allow yourself to have, one of the things I love about the 20-minute meeting is you'll have a 20-minute meeting and then you stand up for, 5 minutes and then come back and then have another
Mhm.
20-minute meeting and then have a 5-minute break or a walk away point where you're adjusting your eyes, you're giving yourself the ability to move around and keep the blood flowing. So instead of thinking like, how do I avoid what I don't, instead of saying to yourself like, how do I avoid that, ask yourself, when is the appropriate time to do that? How often do I need that to feel most productive? And then put that into your calendar. When you have these 20-minute meetings, what you will find is that you're much more effective in 20 minutes than you probably could have been in an hour. And when you put yourself to that, having 2-3 meetings in an hour
Mhm.
now allows you to accomplish in 1 hour when you could have accomplished in a half day. So give yourself permission to take more breaks, maybe shorter periods of them, and at the same time allow yourself, but definitely ask yourself, like, take a screenshot of how you look on video, listen to yourself on a recording. Is there background noise? Is there things that you would have been distracted had you noticed? For myself, I use I know a lot of people will do blurred backgrounds. I prefer actually to have a crisp and clean background, so I actually went with a printed background for myself because it still gives me that virtual look, but at the same time, I specifically chose it because of the psychology it creates for somebody who's watching me. I went with a greenery background because it creates warmth. It creates, the idea that this is inviting, right? Versus something that maybe looks cold or distant. So choose and ask yourself, what is psychologically, what is that background telling me? What is the sound telling me? Am I being clear, crisp and clear? And do I find myself fatigued? In which case, give yourself permission to have more breaks, and at the same time stay at a high level of productivity.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I love the idea of green background. I did not think about it enough in the
Yeah.
past, but that seems like a good idea to copy. Great. One other thing that comes to the mind in this whole idea of virtual selling is that it becomes increasingly hard for the sales leader to train and coach their team. You always keep on hiring new people. They keep on joining the team. They have no idea of what you have been doing all this time. The whole structure for yourself is also new, right? So how do you suggest people keep up the training and coaching part in this whole virtual selling process, sitting from a distance? How do
Yeah.
they operate this entire engine from there?
Absolutely. Training and coaching has to be, like, specifically from a sales manager perspective, this should be their main role.
Oh.
And a lot of sales managers, like when in traditional sales, they started to move themselves out and they became really good at reporting and
Mhm.
not great at training and coaching. And now that we have employees that are starting who are meeting their team without actually physically meeting their team, we're now having people that have had their roles completely changed and the way that they need to communicate with their clients completely changed. It's more critical for us to have this training and coaching brought in. Think of this like a sports team. If
Yeah.
you were the head of the sports team, if you were the head coach of a sports team, what is the most important task that you have to do? Is it reporting back to the senior management on the win and loss rates of your team? Or is it getting them on the field, practicing fundamentals, giving them advice, practicing different types of plays and opportunities and situations that may occur? And this is where sales managers have gotten themselves completely lost. So
Yeah.
what we do is, one of the things that we do is we have work rooms established. These are like a twice a week session, and think of these as like mini like co-working sessions or study sessions. In our case, we do it it for an hour, and you can come in and you can have your peers read your emails, get advice on social selling initiatives, practice role playing of deals, go ahead and replay or do a loss report on, I lost this deal. Where did I lose it? What could I have done differently? A lot of these things that have been falling off the ball for a lot of sales leaders. And it might be because of, number one, they either don't know how. It could be a capability thing, or it could be a time sensitive thing. We just don't have the time to do it. So we've really taken that on. But for sales leaders that want to do this themselves, make it a priority for yourself. Ask yourself, if we were a professional sports team, how much time should we spend just practicing skills and fundamentals? And I can promise you the answer is never zero. It's probably at least, a few hours, if not maybe one full day a week. And that might seem like a lot. Like, Kim, if I have my team spending so much time practicing, when are they actually going to do the work? Go with the idea that if you fail to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And if your team isn't seeing results, don't ask them to continue to do the same work over and over again. Well, just work harder. Doing the same thing without a show on how to improve it is only going to speed up your failure rates. Ask yourself, who has seen success, and how do we get them to replicate that level of success?
Makes sense. So you're saying that over the period in time, the sales managers will play the most important role in this whole idea of virtual selling. They will be the someone who will not just report what is happening, but they will actually make the team work hard, provide them all the coaching and the guidance that they need, and then perform in the field out there, right?
They need to be the example, is really what it comes down to. Now, they don't have to be perfect at that. I am a big believer that some of the best sales managers may have not been the best sales people, but they have to know what happens within the process. And they have to, as sales managers, they have to hold the process sacred. They have to say, here's the steps that we follow. Here's the information that we gather in that lead generation phase. Here's how we actually set out as proper video lead generation contact. Here's how we do this. And they need to be the pillars of knowing how the plays work, right? Think of this yet again like a professional coach. They don't have to be the best players on the field, but they have to know where everybody is at every given time. And that when somebody goes ahead and fumbles the ball, how that's going to impact the results of the team. Sales managers have to be great coaches. They have to hold practice sessions and fundamental sessions as critical to the business as the actual results. And what they need to get better at measuring is not proposals to revenue, but rather lead generation and number of contact meetings, and how many 20-minute lead generation sales meetings are we having to ultimately the sales, looking at better at the leading indicators and not the things that happen just before the sale.
Makes sense. Such an insightful idea and around, how to approach this entire virtual sales. So towards the end, generally, Kim, what we do is we sort of ask people what are their sales reading recommendations for the upcoming year, right? And I would love to know yours. Anything that you want the whole audiences to read around sales, improving their understanding, learning, everything. Anything that you want to recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two big books that I would recommend. Number one, Dan Pink's To Sell is Human. It's a few years old now. It definitely rings true. It rings more true today than it ever had before. And it specifically talks around the new sales elevator pitch. I encourage you to take a look at the different elevator pitches that he structured and ask yourself, how do I create this in emails? How do I change this on my LinkedIn tagline? How can I do this in the same way in an entertaining fashion through video? And really play around and practice that in various different methods. The other reading recommendation I make is actually not primarily a sales book, but is actually more of a management and a leadership book, but it relies so much on the sales philosophy that we have, which is Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It talks about the power of questions and how questions can ultimately make people to take action because they have responded themselves. This is a big central pillar within our sales philosophy. And as an added bonus, I would be remiss to say you have to read my book, which is Sell More Faster. And you can actually download the entire thing for free. You can buy it on any Amazon or any other place where your preferred book is sold, or you can download the entire ebook for free, because I do believe that education and information should be readily available to anybody. So you can find that at bit.ly/sell more faster book, and you can get the entire thing, read it. It goes through my entire sales process that we actually go through KO Sales U. So this isn't just here's one aspect and then continue on, but rather what does the entire thing look like? And I would be honored for anybody who reads it. Let me know that you read it. Send me a screenshot with yourself, and I'm happy to reply or even share it on my own social media.
Great. But yeah, thank you for this amazing conversation, Kim. This was really fruitful. I learned a ton from this whole conversation, and I'm sure you have answered a lot of questions for a lot of people out there. Thanks again for coming on Sales Gambit by Convin.
Thank you.
This is your host, Ashish Santhalia, signing off. See you in the next episode. Till then, keep your head highs and quotas higher. Happy selling.